So anyway, it's nice to see so many new faces and a few nice, normal, regular faces as well, lovely. And yeah, so my name is Cyfarthfa Castle. I'm the Community Officer here at Cyfarthfa Castle Museum and Art Gallery. And it's my pleasure tonight to talk to you about Merthyr system from way back when, really. And yeah, you've probably heard of the Egyptians, obviously. And you've probably heard of the mummy's curse and Tutankhamun's curse and all that type of thing. Yeah? Yeah. This doesn't involve any of that. Okay? Alright, so expectations come down a level, alright? What it does involve is a story about a local gentleman who tried to do something that was quite normal for him and quite out of the norm, and his family's history and him as an individual has been kind of forgotten and lost, really is lost totally, from such a stable name in Merthyr, the Southey family. Printing, stationery, the Merthyr Express, and again we'll get to all this if none of you are familiar with the name Southey, but it's been forgotten. And so this whole talk is mainly focusing on the man himself and his kind of adventure through life. And if you were interested in finding more about the specific Egyptian artifacts and things like that, which we do have on display in the room adjacent to us now, just on the opposite side, then there's plenty of information there. But it'd take me about 2 or 3, maybe even 5 of these talks to get through the history behind the individual objects and their significance in Egyptian history. And so I'm focusing on the significance for local history. Forgive me if you wanted all the Egyptian write-ups. But I promise this will be more interesting anyway. So yeah, Pilgrimage of a Vagabond is the title of the talk. I would love to claim ownership over that talk, but it's been horribly plagiarised. Back in 1906, a gentleman named Harry Hartley Waite Southey gave a talk in various chapels in Merthyr, and he entitled that talk Pilgrimage of a Vagabond. And so I pinched that off him because I thought it was quite fitting to give this talk his name. And this is our man, essentially. So, by the way, okay, I've noticed in the last couple of years of doing this, when I'm thinking, I tend not to go, I say basically. Some people find it incredibly irritating, but forgive me, right? So if I'm thinking and I say basically, give me a break. There's a lot to get through. There's someone from a talk a while back who said, stop saying basically too much. It's giving me a complex now. But this is our man. And we will get to his story, but all stories start at the beginning, obviously. And his father, Harry Hartley Waite Southey, was the third born of the Southey family in Merthyr. Now his father came from Somerset. His name was Harry Wood Southey, okay? Came from Somerset, settled in Merthyr, and got a job pretty much straight away, which is the whole reason why he came here, because he had a job lined up in a newspaper called the Merthyr Telegraph. There's definitely none of you remember the Merthyr Telegraph, because it was out of print quite a significant long time ago, and you all look way too young, to be that old. But he took that job, and literally by 1864, so 5 years or so after he settled in the town, he started working in a new business, his business. He started taking over the Merthyr Express, which has started, but it was kind of burgeoning. It wasn't really much to speak of or anything. And when he jumped on staff, he immediately became chief editor, manager, and then literally the business was a Southey business, a very much a family-run business. And the name of that paper, obviously, the Merthyr Express, which some of you will know, because it's still going on today now. And the whole reason it's still going on today is because of the Southey family. Genuinely is. It's not just a fluke. There are all these other newspapers in Merthyr have died a death and they've gone away totally. The newspaper was so well entrenched and established, not just locally, but nationally, that it stuck, and is still sticking in certain respects. Yeah, it's waned a bit of later years, obviously. But the Southey family were in control of that business well into the 20th century and pushed it through to be the only local newspaper now really in existence. And so Southey, when he was born, when Harry Hartley Waite Southey, and I'll call him the Major from now on, because calling him the full name is going to get a bit too much, definitely. When he was a boy, his father tended to, there's 2 seats on the front here now. Would you mind moving over to the end if that's okay? I promise I'll move in your eye line. There we go. Thank you very much for that. So yes, the boy, Southey the boy, he essentially was born in, as you saw at the beginning, for those of you paying attention, 1871. So when he was born, we don't know a great deal about kind of his early childhood really, because the vast majority of information we've got on Harry and his family comes from what's been written in the Merthyr Express, because they quite periodically wrote various things personal to them, and trawling through the newspapers and stumbling upon some in some cases, you uncover the kind of the general history and trajectory that the family took through life. But there's not a great deal on his early childhood. The only little snippets of his father saying how obsessed he was playing with toy soldiers as a boy. And he used to say that it made him think that he was a born soldier because he had that interest from a young boy. And he wouldn't just smash them together and kick them about. He would form them into a kind of little units and do a proper battle almost. But the other thing then is his interest in what the main majority of this talk is going to be about, essentially, in arts, culture and various different cultural things really. And it all kind of started here, according to his father, in Merthyr's Drill Hall. Is anyone familiar with this building? Yeah. Not many. No. Still standing, obviously. It's a garage now, yeah.
I made a point of going down after your last talk. That's huge.
It's massive, and the roof is still there. Still there. Lovely ornately kind of cast roof is still there, and you can get an MOT insanely cheap there now. And the roof itself is collapsing in massively. But this is a location that kept coming back and back and back over and over in Southey's life. And initially, what the picture you see in there is of an 1888 exhibition. Now, Merthyr was savagely without loads of places of culture for many, many years. An established cultural kind of hub like Cyfarthfa Castle Museum and Art Gallery didn't really exist until into the 20th century. So what they did is they occupied spaces like the Drill Hall and other spaces throughout the town to do pop-up exhibitions and things like that. And what this is, this great exhibition of 1888. And we've actually got an inventory list of everything that's on display. And it was all locally kind of sourced and managed and created, and Harry Wood Southey was involved in that creation of that as well. But an exhibition slightly later featured dioramas and things like that. And Southey came to this exhibition and he was fascinated by these dioramas and these little models of everything. And he went away and started doing his own diorama exhibitions with his fellow friends, and started doing them and doing little pop-up exhibitions in his own home and things like that. And so his father years later uses that as an inkling, as a kind of pointer towards how creative and artistic and how he wanted to express himself in that way. Now obviously, this is kind of, Merthyr technically kind of had a middle class at this point in history. Merthyr was quite slow in getting a middle class, quite right too. And so yeah, the middle class kind of came in. And these little middle class centres started cropping up all around the town, like the Walk, for example, and all that type of thing. This housing, building towards the end of the 19th century, was built specifically for these self-made business people who had a bit of money, who wanted something other than these stone-built miners' cottages. So the villas and these large-scale houses were built. And so, for many years, Harry Wood Southey housed his family on the high street, next door to the Merthyr Express office. That's where they lived. But then once that paper got a bit more established, they moved then to Park Row, which is just by the football station. Park Row, Park Terrace. There's loads to remember. But Park something. Number 6, if memory serves. And yeah, so Harry, growing up, had the opportunities to be educated in a different way. And so his interest varied drastically from other local kind of working class boys, obviously. He wasn't sent down the mines or the pits. He was educated. And in being educated, it stoked a need and a want to be educated. Because obviously, if you're not educated, you're not going to have an interest in being educated. But Southey was, and he continued that throughout his whole life. He just longed for knowledge and experience in different ways and different things, really. And so, yeah, Merthyr's Drill Hall was the template for what would become Cyfarthfa Castle originally, really. But anyway. So talking about the express offices, these buildings obviously still standing today, looking a little bit different. The rest of Leveland Street there now. And this little shop next door was where Harry kind of really cut his teeth managing wise. Because he started work at the age of 16 in the family business. So again, he was educated right up until what we are educated today now, basically. And then started working in the family business as a printer, as an assistant editor, and all these different things. And between 16 and 18, he was trying lots of different things in the family business. But then later on, he was given the Southey stationery shop to run and manage. And again, I don't know if anyone has any memories of that, because particularly the stationery they produced was still out there well into the 20th century. Yeah? But yeah, that was Southey's first managerial duty, really. But by the time this photo was taken, Southey had progressed quite a significant amount through life. And this is a lovely little advert as well. It always comes up dark on PowerPoint for some reason, but it's really vibrant red. But anyway, this is from a little catalogue advertising local businesses, and as you can see, what they're advertising: account book, stationery, fancy goods, sundries, and the stationery shops there, Harry Southey and Sons, always Harry Wood Southey and Sons and all that. And so it's very much family business in every way. They had cousins working there, the brothers, the sisters, it was family business. But what happened to Harry from quite a youngish age, really, is he was forced to be quite independent because his father was struggling with a certain thing that had happened. His wife, Elizabeth, and she came from Hereford and came with him to live in Merthyr. And so Harry Wood Southey, the father, lived with her, but then she fell ill fairly early on into her time in Merthyr, and it was deemed necessary to send her back to Hereford because the climate and everything was being very disastrous to her health. Obviously, we would probably drop down dead if we walked into 19th century Merthyr, to be honest. I'm not even kidding, we probably would. We'd certainly be sick, I can guarantee you that. Because yeah, my colleague Ben, he recently produced these series of 19th century Victorian smells for school groups. Don't smell them, whatever you do. But anyway, in the 19th century, the pollution was obviously horrendous, and so she was sent back to Hereford. But Harry Wood Southey, he couldn't uproot the old family business, he couldn't uproot the family, they were being educated, this was where they were born. And so what he did is he travelled for 22 years back and forth for Hereford on a regular basis, daily, weekly, all the time, back and forth. So that created, the family unit in Merthyr became independent quite quickly and were forced into that independence because of the family situation they were in. So when Harry was 18 or whatnot, he was quite a grown-up, independent chap, obviously, the same as his brother at the age of 16 and his sister Nellie, they were all right up there. And so, but before I progress, anyone know where that is? Who said that? Who said that? Someone said, was that you? Terry was right, he's being bashfully quiet, which is new. Yeah. It's a Rock of Gibraltar, and I'm not randomly showing you a picture of the Rock of Gibraltar. In 1889, Harry decided to fulfill a longing. And it's not the longing that you think it is. Travelling, okay? So get the other thing. But travelling, he was, from a young age, he was interested in seeing other cultures, in exposing himself to other cultures, in seeing how other people live. And it was a genuine, passionate interest. He just yearned to see the world, really, quite generally. And so when he was 18, he saved up his money from working in the Merthyr Express office and then got on a tramp steamer for 4.5 months and travelled around the Mediterranean. And the tramp steamer was named Blodwen, which you think is a joke, but it's not. Amazing. And yeah, and he went on, and luckily for us, years later, and we'll get to his collection and everything like that, but luckily for us, many years later, in the museum archives here, we have 5 photographic albums, and these 5 photographic albums depict visually his 18-year-old voyage around the Mediterranean, starting in the Rock of Gibraltar. Now these are a varied bunch. Some of them are tourist boat photos, because obviously it's quite difficult in 1889 to kind of take a photo when you're on a boat and things like that. So a lot of them are shop boat souvenirs, but 1 or 2 of them, little gems here, there and everywhere, seem to be, and again there's no way of fully knowing, but they so bad that it's probably him taking them in a way. And so all of the photos you're about to see are his journey around the Mediterranean back in 1889 and the start of his real passion for other cultures. So the Rock of Gibraltar, obviously. Any ideas? This is perfect type of drink tea. Any ideas? Seville. Perfect. Terry getting a gold star. Seville. Any ideas? Don't let Terry get them all, for God's sake. I'll never hear the end of it. Oh, we were travelling around the Mediterranean. So yeah, Seville. Seville again, I was trying to trick you. Seville cigars, yeah, amazingly. But I love this photo of those, because you can see the fat of the tobacco being made. Any ideas? No, that's alright actually, because when I first looked at it, I thought it was Cuba as well. I had to figure out where he was going. Cigars you associate with Cuba, that's what they're famous for, in a way. This location, now for those who've ever been to this location, you would have seen this, because it still pretty much exists. At least the frontage exists in this current form there in that photo, really. It's the main port, Port d'Ager, port in Algeria. It's the main port in Algeria. Because it took me a while to figure out. I was thinking, oh, well, how's he getting from Seville? Surely he's going... I was thinking, oh, he's going around in a circle. But the shipping lanes were zipping across the Mediterranean like there's no tomorrow. So all of these are pretty much in order of his trip as well. And Algeria was one of those places that sparked with Southey, really sparked massively, because it was this Middle Eastern kind of African culture that was just exploding in his mind, really, genuinely was. It really inspired him in every single way. And Roman remains in Algeria again. A street scene in Algeria. And now, any ideas? Don't say Merthyr. Who said that? Who said Turkey? There we go, yeah. Istanbul, man, yeah, Turkey. I always want to sing the song when I stand there. So, yeah, this is one of the lovely ones, really. Yes, it is a tourist shot. It was by the Sultan's kind of photographers back in the day. So there's a few of these out there. But again, Southey looked at it and wanted to collect that. This is him picking this photo specifically to bring back and to highlight a bit about himself that he wanted to highlight. And again, many years later, he would use these photos from this album as a lantern slideshow to show the dress and style in Turkey. Okay? He had it literally, he's the only Merthyr-born boy I've ever known to have a talk entitled Turkish Traditional Dress. That's the title of the talk. Now I'm sure you'd all want to come to that. And again, any ideas? Yeah. The album is chock full of Algeria and Istanbul and Turkey and all those Middle Eastern cultures kind of bubbling over in different ways. He really did adore them. Again, anyone know this tourist attraction? Who said? Oh, what, you were whispering? You said it, didn't I? Did you? No. Someone said it. Well, if you're not going to say it, I'm going to move on. You'll have to Google it. So, in between travelling, 1 year previous, Southey did another life-changing thing. So in 1889, he took that faithful voyage around the Mediterranean, but when he was 17, he joined the Merthyr Territorial Forces, or the Merthyr Volunteers as they were called back in the day. And this is a shot of him in 1907 with fellows from that regiment. This literally would change his entire life from top to bottom. I think we underestimate a lot today the impact of kind of joining a group of fellows like the Territorial or Volunteer Forces back in the day. The impact that had on a person. Now Southey, I'm not going to jump to the end here, but he never married, he never had any children or anything like that. He adored going around the world, seeing things, absorbing culture, but also he adored the army and the way of life that gave him. He relished in organising talks and walks from Merthyr to Aberystwyth and all this insane stuff. And he would give talks locally in the drill hall all the time. So he would be talking in that drill hall, doing training sessions and really helping his fellow troops out. And eventually, by the time this photo was taken, he would earn the rank of captain. And this cup in the middle, this is how life kind of works really, I think. because it just happened a minute ago, which I'll tell you about that later, but this one happened in exactly the same way as the other one happened earlier tonight. Is that I was doing all this Southey research about 3 years ago, because I do plan for these types of things, obviously. And yeah, and so when I was gathering the research and the material and putting it all together, just a guy turned up with a box full of photos and a metallic object. And I instantly, being nosy, said, "Oh, hello, what's that?" And he said, "Oh, I've come to donate this, all from my father, Mr. Chamberlain, he was, my grandfather." And he basically donated this set of photos, which is one of which is here. His great-grandfather is this gentleman here. And he donated it because he was local. He was local. And he had won this cup. He had won this cup for firing, for rifle skill. And so he was donating that. And I kind of pushed him to the side and was looking at him. Because that's what my head was in at the moment, because I instantly didn't see anyone else. So, oh, Southey, it's amazing. And then I looked at the cup that's down before it. The Southey and Sons Rifle Cup. And we've got that in the collection as well now, thankfully, thanks to this gentleman. And amazingly, they funded and run loads of different military activities. And again, that wasn't just Southey, that was his father seeing how much of a passion he had. And he allowed him and supported him in various ways. That's another shot, and the only reason I include this shot is because anyone know the house? I'd be impressed if Terry didn't know. It's the Chase. Does anyone know where the Chase is? Those who are familiar with the Gurness will know the Chase. Yeah. It's at the bottom of the hill as you go up to the Gurness. It's got a nice wall around it. And that was where the Southey family evolved up to. So Park Row slowly evolved to the Chase, okay? And this is a shot of all of the gentlemen in his regiment. This is Chamberlain from the earlier photo, outside the house. Southey's missing from this photo for whatever reason, not sure why. But anyway, he didn't just get involved in army life and travelling. He was an avid member of the Amateur Dramatic Society. So in the Temperance Hall in Merthyr, now the Scala, you would be shocked at the amount of high-class plays that went on there at one time. And he was a key member for years and years and years. He would perform all manner of different plays. Not only that, he would give gymnastic performances locally to show off his physique and skill, because he kept his body quite fit, or he liked to think he did, at least, didn't he? And so yeah, there's this lovely story about a Dowless Bazaar. At this week's Dowless Bazaar, Southey gave a fantastic gymnastic demonstration. And you just want to be a fly on the wall back then, really, I think, to see if it was fantastic, because it was the Merthyr Express printing it out. But yeah, so he even tried his luck as a professional tennis player for a while. He's actually logged as having some professional games as a tennis player as well. He literally was out there and doing loads of different stuff. He never wanted to stop, seemingly, constantly busy. And then that took him all the way into the early 1900s. Anyone know where this is?
Egypt.
Cocky. Yeah, it is. Specifically?
Valley of the Kings?
Yes, Valley of the Kings. So in 1901, Southey did something which was to change the history of this museum and the history of the Southey family quite drastically, really. He first became associated with Egypt, which is pretty much the association, which is why probably brought many of you guys here today. And so in 1901, he decided to fulfill a need. Now, in 1889, he travelled the Mediterranean. In 1893, he went around all the major cities in Europe, you know, Brussels, Berlin, all these others. And he kept doing these trips every couple of years, because it wasn't cheap by any stretch of imagination. And again, middle-class person, yeah, but it still took a time to get that income to a level that he could just go for 4 or 5 months. And so then in 1901, him and a friend arranged a trip to Egypt. And they started off in the spring, and immediately his friend fell ill and couldn't go on any further before they even left Britain. And so Southey had the decision of whether to go alone or to come back, and he went alone. And so he went down to Egypt and changed his life, essentially. Nearly died in the first 3 weeks. because of the heat exhaustion, severe heat exhaustion. So badly that the doctors were already preparing letters and things like that home to his family to say, look, your son is not in a good way, is there any way you can get out here and see him before he passes away? He was that bad, really, because he was unprepared. Southey's confidence, and this is probably why I like him quite a bit actually, his confidence beyond his means, confident beyond his means, and I'm a massive culprit of that. And yeah, and Southey went into the Valley of the Kings when he was well again. He pulled himself back together and travelled down the country to Luxor, to Thebes, to the Valley of the Kings, and all over. And there's an amazing story actually about how he entered the Valley of the Kings. And back in 1901, he did a series of letters back to the Merthyr Express, and he entitled them all Vagabond letters. And that's where this kind of pilgrimage of a vagabond kind of thing comes from, really. And they were sporadically throughout 1901, they would come in and he would write stuff about his journey. And what he wrote going into the Valley of the Kings, he said, on entering it, the heat just hits you. And the walls of the valley act like a perfect oven, and dotted around the top of the valley wall are all vultures looking at you. And he had the flair for this dramatic kind of journalist and writing. He never belittled anything he did. He always bigged it up, which is fine. And so he went in and started seeing various tombs. He saw this tomb, which is a tomb of Southey the First. If I butcher any Egyptian pharaohs' names as well, you've got to forgive me. I butcher a lot of Welsh names. So yeah, this is one of the longest kind of entrance ways in the whole of the Valley of the Kings. The tomb goes down and down and down and down, and it's quite hard to get through, to be honest. And Southey didn't get all the way in. He got all the way and had to turn back because the heat was just so intense and you could barely catch your breath. That's how intense it was. I mean, they didn't build the Valley of the Kings in the place they did just out of, oh, that'll be okay. It was that environment that was pushing people out of the way. It was that lifeless environment, really, which people struggle living in. Particularly pasty white guys from Merthyr. But he came back anyway, and first thing he said coming back out of the tomb is to his guide, because he had a guide. His guide's name was Abdullah, and he called him his donkey boy. And he didn't call that because he looked like a donkey or anything. He was carrying the donkey. He literally had the donkey packed with all the provisions and everything like that. And so his donkey boy Abdullah, he turned to him and said, oh, could you show me any undiscovered tombs? Because all the tombs he was seeing had iron bars, had gates, had stewards. Even back in 1901, they all had stewards there monitoring the people going in and out and keeping an eye on everything as they should. And Abdullah was a bit apprehensive. He was like, oh, I don't know, is he trying to catch me out? Because many times they would try to catch these guides out. And if they said yes, they would call the steward and the steward would give him an hammering. And so he was obviously a bit weary. And so after a conversation or two, he said, okay, I'll show you an undiscovered tomb. And so they walked in further into the Valley of the Kings. And he pointed down this little hole in the ground. And he said, down there. And so they went down there. And it was literally this horrible kind of little cavern full of dust and sand, and you could barely breathe. And Southey remembers seeing an inscription on the side of the tomb, but the tomb had been robbed already. The tomb had been taken, so the mummy was taken from it. But he couldn't hardly stay down there. They had to come out again because the environment was so intense. And so they come out. And on coming out, on gathering their breath, Abdullah turned to Southey and said, do you want any mummy remains? Which is a question you're always going to like to ask, I suppose. And Southey, again, he was suspicious of him now. And so he was suspicious, thinking, oh, is he trying to have me here? Is he trying to... And so he said, if you sell me false remains, I will make sure that you pay severely for it. And he was like, no, they're the real thing, the real article. So he said, okay. And so they took him even deeper into the Valley of the Kings and took him to this mud hut, literally a mud hut, just in the middle of the Valley of the Kings. And he walked through the door and there were sheep and goats running all around him. And the way he wrote it, he said there were sheep who kept rubbing up against me all the time and I couldn't stand it and all this type of thing. And he said then he saw something move in the corner of the room. Something move, and he said he saw something move and he thought, oh, what's that? And then he looked and he said in his own description, now this is not me being nasty, was the most haggard, old, horrible looking thing he'd ever seen in his life. okay? And he said he could barely look at her. So he asked Abdullah to communicate with her, and he would look at Abdullah and look at her. Whether you think that's nasty or not, it kind of is, it's quite reflective of how Southey would write. It was very sarky, very trying to be funny, trying to please, sometimes missing, sometimes hitting, constantly left, right, centre. And so this haggard old woman sat there, and Southey then looked in the rest of the room, and he saw in the room this gigantic pile of mummy remains and Egyptian fragments, all just piled up in the corner of the room in total and utter disarray. Hands, feet, torso, legs, bits of pot, bits of wall, bits of any type of Egyptian coffin, tomb good that you can imagine was piled up. Okay? Instantly, he didn't look at the piled up stuff. He looked at this posh jar behind the woman and started bartering for that, trying to get a posh jar, but she wouldn't have none of it. He offered her a £5 and she said no. So that come to an end. And so then he turned his attention to the pile and he picked up 2 hands, 2 feet, bartered for them, and then he picked up 2 heads. And he looked at them and he thought, oh, one looked like they were almost smiling. So he put the other one back and took the one that he thought looked happy. And so he bought that. And that is kind of this starting point which led to what you see in that room now. That mummy head that he held in his hand is the mummy head that's in the room opposite. If you've ever been here and seen that mummy's head, that is the exact one. And so what would happen over this course now of the journey is he would literally go down through Egypt and keep collecting and keep investigating and meeting people and getting connections and just looking at it all the way down to the Sudan and back up and all over for months on end, and he would be collecting. And then he would come back to Merthyr. And one of the very first things he did in late July, when he came back to Merthyr, was write a letter. He wrote a letter to the local free library. Excuse me. And this letter was basically stating, look, I've got a load of mummy parts and a load of other Egyptian stuff. Do you want it? And literally, to go more in depth into that letter, it continued on saying, many of the local residents in Merthyr will never get a chance to go to the British Museum and see the fantastic Egyptian artefacts they got there. So I think we should house these in the library, put them on display and allow people to come and see them and be fascinated as I am with them. And that's what happened. Amazingly, Merthyr contained a library from 1901 to 1909 that housed a mummy, which is a rarity, I can tell you that. I haven't found many. And yeah, and so that collection stayed in Merthyr, and he wouldn't go back to Egypt for a time really. But he would continue running the family business because his mother, by this kind of early 20th century period, his mother had passed away and his father had stepped back from the managerial duties, and so it fell fully to Harry really. So Harry focused on military life, on running the Merthyr Express, and again we underestimate drastically how popular the Merthyr Express was. It was literally one of the most popular weekly newspaper publications in all of Wales, arguably all of Britain. It was really, really big news, genuinely was. And so he was concentrating on running that and keeping that reputation going. And so he didn't travel again until 1912. And that's when he took on his biggest voyage, around the world tour. Around the world tour. Now this is going to take a while, you're all strapped in there. Excuse me a sec, I'll have a drink. So yeah, it would start in America, and he would travel with his friend Goma Thomas, who some of you may find familiar. He's a local boy as well. I've lost his name. There we go, Harry Southey, Harry Hartley. There we go. And so he was on the ship Olympio, as it looks there. And yeah, one of the White Star liners, and he went out and just travelled around America. Quite early on, Goma Thomas had to go back to responsibilities locally, and he continued on his own, not a care in the world, just went off, meeting people, experiencing life and doing different things. He was very much a kind of lone wolf out in the world, just go and do what he pleases when he was let loose. So when he wasn't running the family business, he would just go out and travel and enjoy it. He went to the Grand Canyon. In the Grand Canyon, there's a hotel that was set quite a way away from the Grand Canyon, and one day he's got his stuff together and thought, I'm going to the Grand Canyon, I'm going to walk down the Grand Canyon and then walk back. I want to see it, I want to walk to the base. Disastrous. two girls in the hotel said, oh, we'll come to that. And then your brother said, oh, I wouldn't go, it's really hard, I'm not going, no way. And so he went, oh, don't worry about you then, come on ladies, we'll go. And in his own description, these two ladies were ladies of fine physique, which I've tried that compliment on my wife and it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. It's lost to time, that compliment. So yeah, he travelled, and all along the trail to the Grand Canyon, there were donkeys coming back, and people on the back of the donkeys going, you need a donkey? And then he's going, no, I don't need a donkey, I'm okay, I'm going to do this myself. Another person, you really need a donkey, you're going to die, you're going to kill yourself. No, I don't need a donkey, I'm doing this myself. And so he charged in, relatively uneventful descent into the Grand Canyon. And then, at the base, he had a spot of lunch and decided to turn round, return journey. Soon as the return journey started, boof, the heavens opened up. And it was the most torrential rain Southey had ever experienced in his life. Relentless as well. Non-stop for hours. And so the journey up the Grand Canyon wall then became like climbing Everest. It genuinely was. You might think to yourself, oh, it can't be that hard. But I'm telling you now, it is insanely hard getting back up there, particularly in those conditions. When there's bits of the wall coming down, there's water rushing down the walkways that you were walking on. Halfway up, they found an old abandoned clay Indian hut that they hid out in for a couple of hours. And then he managed to rally the girls round and charge up the hill, dragging them both with him, apparently. He wrote that. They might have been dragging him. But yeah, and eventually got up, and they waited at the top, and then a search party came, because the hotel manager was so convinced that they would be down the bottom, half dead, that he sent this whole search party out to get them, with donkeys. Always take a donkey to the Grand Canyon. Oh, Abdullah. And when he went around the world, he kept going around and around, he even ended up in Japan. And when he got to Japan, he essentially started in Japan as he meant to go on. He went to visit the throne room in Japan, and in his own words, nearly got beheaded because he did the unthinkable thing of sitting on the throne. Bit of a no-no. And so instantly the stewards and everything started shouting and barking at him, and he couldn't understand Japanese, obviously. But later on he found out that the penalty for a crime of that level was beheading, apparently. And so he thought that was a close escape, and I'll write that down and send it back. And yeah, and he kept going through Shanghai and all these places, and again he was collecting as he went. But he doesn't seem to have collected hardly anything from America and all that type of thing. He seemed totally kind of convinced with these cultures of age more than anything. So cultures that had a bit of backstory to them. And obviously the American culture, although it's got a lot of age now, was still at its start really of independence, and all that type of thing. So there wasn't much in the way of interest in him to collect it all. But he eventually came back to Merthyr and continued running the Merthyr Express and made no plans to travel. But then 1914 happened and the forced travel came upon him. You all know. If you don't know, then get out. But the 1914 war, Great War, World War I, started, and on August the 8th, 1914, Southey, as an officer in the volunteer forces in Merthyr, got up with his 3 other fellow officers and led a march from the drill hall down to the train station in Merthyr Tydfil of hundreds and hundreds of Merthyr volunteers for the army. And Southey ploughed out of the town, and as far as I can tell, and I am open to be proven wrong on this, but as far as I can physically tell, that was the last time he would set foot in Merthyr, and he would go. Now, Southey's war didn't start instantly like a lot of other troops, because again, there's this image that troops, right, you volunteered, get to France, and you're just in France, and you're like, what's this? It's a gun. Oh, okay. But there was this whole training process that they went through. It wasn't just throw them out quick, because they obviously didn't want them to die. Yeah, the training process was a bit dodgy in certain places and a bit haphazard with certain officers, but ultimately there was that, and that was Southey's main duty initially, through 1914 and into much of 1915, was training troops ready for preparation out for the various fronts around the world. And so it wouldn't be until September 1915 that Southey actually set foot on a battlefield. Now, to backtrack slightly, when Southey joined the volunteer forces, he was eager to prove himself. It's this thing that I struggle getting into the mentality of it. Many of you probably wouldn't, but I struggle. This yearn to kind of prove yourself in battle and all that jazz. I got a yearn to run from that battle and be alive. I'm okay, thanks. And but yeah, he genuinely wanted to prove himself in battle. And so when the first opportunity after joining the volunteers came up when he was of age, he thought he was fit and healthy, the Boer War. He signed up and was ready to rock. But the people, the medical officers, give him a physical and his knee. He suffered a knee injury recently and it put him out of action for a good few years. And so that played on his mind, and he mentions that a few times in his life. And eventually he would grow up, and the first battlefield he would enter would be this World War I battlefield in Gallipoli. Now, if any of you have ever heard about Gallipoli, the battlefield there, and heard about the war that happened there, it was horrendous. But Southey came at a point. The most severe fighting was happening in the August of 1915. And it was horrendous because obviously, you're looking at this picture now. We were coming in here and the Turkish had already lined up on the hills here, fortified, prepared, higher ground. And we were coming in the only way we could. Straight head on, lower ground, massacre. So early on, the whole drive was to dig trenches, dig in, prepare ourselves, get foundations down, and then try to slowly push forward. But they came to as many fronts in the war, World War I happened, they came to a stalemate quite early on. And they make a little ground, lose a little ground, make a little ground, lose a little ground. It's constantly to and fro, really. And so when Southey arrived, he literally came into the battle when he was at his most stalematey. I've invented a word. And he literally walked into this battlefield and everyone was kind of stuck. They were all doing mundane general tasks, but also they were wedged in, they were walled in. Because if you go to the boats in the bay, then you are in range of the fire, so you'd hide out in your trenches and try to stay there, and you would be relieved periodically throughout the day. But ultimately, illness, when Southey came in, was the biggest threat. Like, obviously the Turkish on their day was an incredible big threat, but illness was catastrophic to these lines of troops. Dysentery and everything. On one day, just one day in September, 28 people in Southey's regiment died and lost their life. And that was only a little regiment of just a couple of hundred, that's it. And 28 people died. And so you can imagine, times that by all the regiment that are scattered out over this peninsula, it was catastrophic. And so the first thing Southey did when he set foot in Gallipoli was he went looking for all the Merthyr boys that were separated from him when he started the war. He genuinely did. There's countless, I can name 5 different accounts of this, all from separate places, of troops saying, oh, good old Southey came, saluted me before I even had a chance to salute him, and he was asking me if I'm alright, how am I doing, am I well, and all this type of thing. And he specifically sought out all these Merthyr boys to check in that they're okay, and then starting his process. And really early on, the commanding officer for the regiment fell ill. And that, again, another boy who was from Triaris. And he went off to hospital, and Southey took the command. And so he was responsible now, directly responsible for all these men. And he took that responsibility incredibly serious. But much of his kind of promotion was spent officiating funerals, digging more trenches, making sure that his troops didn't die of starvation, of frostbite, of dysentery, a lot of that. Like, always the threat of the Turkish, and always the threat within your own trench as well, constant. You can't imagine how bad that would be, I tell you. But anyway, they even spent like 2 weeks stretches just in the same clothes in a trench, just lying there, totally soaking, their clothes frozen on them, literally because the weather was so horrendous towards November that the clothes would freeze on them. They had the catastrophic luck of having torrential rain followed by snow and frosty weather, and so they literally had no chance. They had no chance. And so the British government retreated and pulled them back. And it's one of Churchill's kind of biggest defeats. Whenever people talk about Churchill, they always talk about the good stuff. They don't talk about how catastrophic his decision making in this period was, really. So they retreated. Any guess as to where they retreated to? I know you know.
Gaza,
Egypt. Egypt. Yeah. Cairo. Yeah. And so, this is a photo of Southey in a hospital, in a military hospital. And all of these other troops here, why I know it's a hospital, because I'm super bright, obviously. No. If someone told me. as most good things happen now. The uniforms that they're in, they're called hospital blues, although you can't see the colour in this photo. That's the general thing that the troop would wear during this period in the hospital. Blues. Officers would be exempt. But Southey was suffering from a severe case of jaundice, because the whole running of his regiment, getting them out and getting them to Egypt, just put a massive strain on him. And by the time he got to Egypt, he was collapsing with a severe case of jaundice. He still had time to have a nice Christmas dinner in the mess, which is weird, because you think of the 5th Welsh Regiment, a lot of Merthyr boys in that regiment, when they got into Cairo, it was 2 days before Christmas, 1915, sorry, and essentially they were like, right, where's the turkey? Which is great. And the ship, the mess captain went out, found the turkey, found a load of veg, brought back and made them a proper Christmas dinner, and then the day after, Southey all out collapsed and was hospitalised, which is where this photo is believed to have been taken, because it's the only prolonged hospital stay he had in that condition, obviously. And they would stay in Egypt for quite a substantial amount of time. They didn't leave until early 1917, okay? So they arrived in December 1915 and didn't leave until 1917, right? A long time. Southey took advantage of his time in Egypt, and he continued doing what he had done back in 1901, collecting, exploring Egypt, looking at things, buying things, bartering, collecting, and he had a storage space that he would be filling up all the time with different artefacts. And because he was always paranoid about getting the fake article, he befriended the curator at the Cairo Museum, go to the top, and took him to bazaars and other fairs all around Egypt and said, is Aria? Yeah, okay. Is Aria? Yeah, okay, done. and that's how the collection really grew massively. Because you remember back in 1901, he was still a youngish guy, you know, and he was on his own, didn't have much ideas of storing or prolonging his stay, and so he kind of restricted himself to what he could bring back. But now he was there for the long haul, so he was collecting like no end. But then in early 1917 he got a call, and he was thankful of the call, really, because in his own words he said, I'm sick of sand, 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 and even more sand. And so he was thankful of the greenery he saw while moving into Palestine. The British Army and the 5th Welsh Regiment were moving into Gaza to finally take on the Turkish army that had battered them back. And so they were ready to start pushing forward. And in that push, Southey was mowed down by one of these. He was shot during the First Battle of Gaza on March 27th, 1917. So, 100 years ago. See, the dates are not coincidental. And yeah, he was shot and he didn't die instantly. He remained. One account, and I'll get to why I'm saying one account now, one account has him lying out in this desert along with a lot of his fellow soldiers. Up to about 268 of them passed away on that day. And he was laying dead, well not dead, bleeding to death on the desert floor. High temperatures in the day, sub-zero temperatures in the night, and when he was brought back, there was very little chance of him pulling through. Strangely though, when he was brought back by a guy, he was brought back and a guy that treated him was a guy he knew. It was a gentleman called Charles Richardson White. Now Charles Richardson White is, again, another insanely interesting character if you ever get the chance to look into him. He's a Merthyr Vale surgeon, not Merthyr born, but he set up shop in Merthyr Vale for many years, and he was a staunch part of Merthyr society for many, many, many years. And an incredible guy. He used to write constantly about the war, but very strict and very straightforward. He didn't allow himself to be censored left, right, centre. He would be quite straight up. Right? And he made a letter home, which reached Harry Wood Southey, which detailed the last moments of Southey's kind of life, really. So he was brought to the casualty clearing station, and Charles Richardson White treated him, gave him 2 cups of tea and tried to patch him up as much as he can. 2 cups of tea first, he mentions in the letter, by the way. No, get the stitch back to tea. But he gave him the tea and stitched him up as best he could and tried to heal him as best he could. And then, as he was exhausted, went back to his tent, but he couldn't sleep. So he came back 3 hours later and checked on him. And in those 3 hours, it was deemed necessary to move him to a proper military hospital. So he was put onto a train, and Charles Richardson White said, I don't think he'll make it past this certain point. And he didn't. Passed away, lost his life on that train on March 30th, 1917. And strangely, not strangely, but quite poignantly, you've got to remember now, this guy tried endlessly to bring Middle Eastern, Egyptian, African, and all these different cultures back to Merthyr. Tried endlessly to do that, to expose them to these things that he so interested in. And then his eventual place that he was laid to rest, where the train stopped, the nearest military funeral and nearest military cemetery, Egypt. And so he is now laid to rest in that country that he tried desperately to bring back to us. And he was killed by a culture who he tried desperately to bring back to us as well. And it's full of these weird little contradictions and ironies and all this type of stuff. And this is a write-up of what's on his grave. I have fought a good fight, I have finished my course. But he hadn't finished his course for us. Now, this coincidence number 2, you remember the earlier coincidence that I told you about, obviously. Definitely you all do, I know, you're all still with me. And yeah, this letter has been in my slideshow for a while now, and it's been on my radar for quite a while, because I read it. And it baffled me, because it's a letter from Harry Wood Southey to a gentleman locally who fought in Gaza. Mr. Jones. Fought in Gaza, and the letter is inviting him to Southey's house to discuss the last moments of his son's life, because he wanted to know what happened. And me telling you that now, you think, oh, well, it's not that strange. Well, it is when you go back, okay? When you go back to April, which is a month after he died, Harry Wood Southey had released a newspaper article that basically pieced together all aspects of his son's last days. He even titled it The Last Days of Harry Southey, Major Harry Southey. And he went into super in-depth detail about when he was shot, what happened to him, going to Charles Richardson. He pieced all these letters together to get an indication of his son's last days, the Major's last days. But there was one contradiction, just one tiny thing, and it seemingly has played on him for generations after. Because there was one person who said that Southey was shot the day before. So he said, the one person said who was fighting alongside him said he was shot on the first day, March 26th, not March 27th. So, obviously, that is a massive implication, because he knows outright that he was taken from that desert on March 28th. So it's a question of 24 hours or 48 hours in the desert. And that is that little contradiction that his father tried desperately to figure out. And even in July, so months after his son dies, he's still trying to talk to the troops to fine-tune that story. This letter is in the museum collection, and weirdly, earlier enough, someone was telling me this story. What was your name again, sorry? Gil. Oh, I should remember my grandfather's name, Gilbert, yeah. And Gilbert was telling me how he has a friend who basically was the son of the gentleman who the letter was written to, the Jones family up in Dowlas. And I then brought this letter out and showed it to him, and he said, wow, that's the actual letter.
Couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
You showed me tonight.
Because that was his Southey anecdote, see? He was telling me his Southey anecdote, and I was like, well, I got the original letter.
The only reason I came tonight was thinking about the letter. I hadn't seen the letter, but then you told me.
There you go. Yeah.
Music.
Exactly, and you were friends. Exactly, Glyn Jones, you were friends. Exactly. Who's the headmaster, ex-headmaster of Gwenvarren Primary School? My ex-headmaster, who lives at the top of my street. Coincidence? It's bizarre. But yeah, I didn't realise I'd live in the same street of the son of the letter writer. Well, that's a bit weird. And I didn't realise I'd be taught by the same guy. But anyway. Our story ends where the museum story begins, really. And the museum was founded in 1910, as many of you probably know. And in founding the museum, we opened an exhibition up to test the water, much the same as what they did in the drill hall, testing the water in 1909, seeing if an art exhibition would go well. But then you can't have one thing in Merthyr without having another, see, it's always the way. And as soon as certain locals heard about an art exhibition being on, people turned up, I got this, do you want this? You want this? Have it. Have it. And it ended up being an object exhibition as well as an art exhibition. And a set of objects, one of the many sets of objects we displayed, was that Egyptian collection that he had given to the library many years previously. So it came from the library, came up here, and here it remained. And then, in his death, he wrote a will explicitly, saying that his collections of curiosities and various pictures he leaves to the Corporation of Merthyr Tydfil, not to Cyfarthfa Castle Museum. He left to you. This is what he left to you guys. Generations of Merthyr people. He didn't leave it to Cyfarthfa Castle, he left it to Merthyr. That's what he did. And he did that because he thought that he should do that, and that's the right thing to do. The worth of that collection, right? Even then, he could have earned, and his family could have earned a pretty penny off that, but his family followed his wishes through. And not only that, they went the extra mile. His father, Harry Southey, actually transported all at his own cost all of the Egyptian artefacts that were still in Egypt back to Merthyr. And it took from 1917 till 1924 to come back. It was years of negotiation, of travelling, of packing, of paying, and sending all this stuff back. And then in 1924, this exhibition of Southey's full collection was displayed. But even then, it wasn't full. Even then, they didn't have the space to put it all out. And again, we pretty much got everything out now. And over 90 odd objects, Egyptian art objects, dating back from as late as 4,000 years ago to 100 BC, and all over the place, all different aspects of Egyptian culture over many, many years. And yeah, like I say, he didn't give that to Cyfarthfa Castle. It only came to us because we were the only place to take it. That was it. If the drill hall was established, it probably would have ended up there. But we were literally the only place that could take a collection like that. And so, yeah. This portrait was then made by his father in 1924. I say portrait, it's a cheating portrait, it is. It's a cheating. There's a photo painted over. A cheap version. But it's still quite expensive, definitely. And yeah, and this was put next to the case and displayed alongside the collection, and still is now. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed me talking endlessly about Harry Hartley Waite Southey, and hopefully you'll spread the word and keep his memory alive, really. 100 years ago he did this, and yeah, let's try to keep it alive for another 100 years, isn't it? See. Bit ambitious maybe. We'll try. But thank you very much.
Well done.